Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. We're going to take a few more seconds to let everyone get logged in before we get started. It is so good to see so many familiar faces this morning. Good morning on this beautiful Wednesday morning. I hope the weather is looking wonderful where you are today. I will request that everyone stays muted this morning. Good morning, good morning. And I will take just a few more seconds and we will get started. I would like to be respectful for everyone's time today. So good to see so many familiar faces. We are so excited about today's presenter. And I will give it just a few more seconds before I get started. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Good morning, everyone. My name is Egypt Lloyd. For all those who don't know, I am the co-founder, along with my father, Dennis Lloyd, who is with us this morning. And we founded the Slave Legacy History Coalition in 2021. And the Slave Legacy History Coalition was brought together by the Lloyd family to, provide a platform for the general public to be able to speak and to be able to connect the history of enslaved people and the descendant, and to be able to educate the general public. We are excited about today's presenter, Dr. Edda Black. But before I get started on in our honored guests, I will turn it over to our lead coordinator, Naomi Gordon, who will give our announcements today. Naomi?
Thank you, Egypt. Bear with me one moment. I'm going to share my screen. So just a couple of announcements this morning. We have some exciting events going on this weekend. So coming up on Saturday, the 17th, Brookline resident and advocate Felina Silver will be giving a talk titled A Family of Neighbors Throughout Brookline. This is part of the Speaking from the Heart, a Diversity of Brookline Stories series presented in partnership with Hidden Brookline and the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. This will be at 2 p.m. at the Brookline Public Library. And then on Sunday, the 18th, will be the 4th annual Kitty Knox Ride hosted by Mass Bike and their partners. This community ride explores Boston, Cambridge, Watertown, and Waltham, while honoring the legacy of Catherine or Kitty Knox, who was a biracial cyclist who broke barriers in the 1890s, excuse me. So proceeds will support the upcoming Kitty Knox plays, which will bring her story to life. And I'll drop links for registration in a moment as well. Also on that Sunday at Old South Church will be a play about Phyllis Wheatley and Benjamin Franklin, as well as a musical performance by Castle of Our Skins. The evening will conclude with a discussion as well as refreshments. The live stream and recording will be available at oldsouth.org. And for more information, do email Debbie Weiss at djweiss, and that's WIESS at msn.com. And if folks have any other announcements to share, Juneteenth is coming up. So if you have events, do email me. You can reach me at naomi@slavelegacyhistorycoalition.org. And with that, I'll pass it back to Egypt.
Great. Thank you, Nami, for those announcements. So today we are very excited about today's presenter. But before I introduce our honored guest, I will encourage everyone during Dr. Edda Black's speaking that you will enter any questions that you have in the chat. we will pull those questions and call upon you to speak with Dr. Fields Black. So today, we are honored to have Dr. Edda Fields Black. And if you have not had the chance, please review her bio in our newsletter in its entirety. She does recently have a book that she has written, COMBEE, Harriet Tubman, the Combahee River Raid, and the Black Freedom during the Civil War. Now, that book is available on our website and within our newsletter for purchase. But do have a special announcements in regards to Dr. Edda Fields Black. I was going to read her bio, but for the members on here today that do not know, Dr. Edda Fields last week was announced on Carnegie Mellon Professor has won the 2025 Pulitzer Prize Award in History on this book. So I would like for everyone to take a moment to please congratulate our honored guest, Dr. Edda Fields Black, on her Pulitzer Prize win last week. I would love to hear her thoughts on that before we get into her presentation. That is a remarkable, and thank you for giving us this time. You just won this award, and we're here blessed with your presentation today. So thank you so much for your time. It's an honor, Dr. Fields Black, and I will turn it over to you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you this morning. I the Pulitzer Prize in History is a dream come true. It is truly a dream come true, and I am humbled. I'm honored that to be the vehicle through which our ancestors have told this story and to then have it recognized, right? It was honor enough to be the vehicle, and then to be recognized for the work is really icing on the cake. So we are thrilled. It's a new reality. I'm trying to adjust and keep up, but I'm grateful, very, very grateful for the blessings. And so I'm excited to talk with you today, and thank you for inviting me, Slave Legacy History Coalition, to talk about COMBEE and introduce you to the book for those of you who may not have read it, and to the main characters. So I'm honored to talk with you today about what happened on June 1st through 3rd, 1863, when Harriet Tubman and her group of spies, scouts, and pilots piloted Colonel James Montgomery up the Combahee River. And the raid began on the night of June 1st, around 9 p.m. And this was the night of the full moon, and this was during the spring tide. So the highest high tides and the lowest low tides of the lunar cycle. They left the wharf in downtown Beaufort. And if you think about it, 9 o'clock in June, it's dark, right? It has just gotten dark. And they were in three armed U.S. Army boats. Um, these were not the Navy's state-of-the-art warships. These were some retrofitted, tricked out, souped up steamships that the Army actually bought from New England. The lead gunboat, as it was called, Lincoln's gunboat, was a Boston ferry boat tricked out with some small arms, and two transport steamers. So these three armed U.S. Army boats leave the wharf in downtown Beaufort at 9 p.m. They go north through the Beaufort River, and the only opposition they face are sandbars, which they encounter at the mouth of the Coosaw River. Now, the Coosaw River then and now is notorious for its sandbars, and I suggest in COMBEE that it was because of one of Tubman's men. We know that she was the commander of men, 8 or 9. These men she recruited, she trained, she led, and they were all spies, scouts, and pilots. And several of them they were all, except one, from the Beaufort from the low country area, let's put it that way. And all formerly enslaved, and several of them were actually boatmen. Several of them were boatmen from Beaufort and the Sea Islands. One in particular was named Isaac Hayward, and we know that I show in COMBEE that Isaac was born on Coosaw Island. And so he may have been the person who made the call that they saved time by going up through the mouth of the Coosaw River, even though it was known to be littered with sandbars and floating sandbars, that this would help them to preserve the advantage of time and darkness and get onto the COMBEE plantations faster. It was also risky because of those sandbars. So they lost one of the boats. One of the transport steamers, the Sentinel, ran aground and they had to leave it behind. The next high tide was 3 hours later, and they couldn't sit and wait for 3 hours and potentially get picked off by the Confederates. So they left behind a transport steamer, and this must have been heartbreaking to Harriet Tubman, her spy scouts and pilots, the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, who were 300 Black soldiers, because they were all formerly in bondage, right? And this transport steamer was on the mission, 2 transport steamers, to bring the freedom seekers back from the COMBEE plantations. So having lost one, they could now only bring back half as many people. So 2 boats continue up the COMBEE, up to the mouth of the COMBEE River, and they stop next at Fields Point. At Fields Point, 2 companies of the 2nd South Carolina disembark, and they encounter the Confederate pickets. Now, I said at the beginning when I started that the raid took place in June, early June of 1863. This was the sickly season on the rice plantations of the South Carolina and Georgia Low Country. It's the time of year when rice was growing in the rice fields in standing water. This stagnant water bred mosquitoes, and the mosquitoes carried malaria. Malaria is endemic to the region by this time. It's the time of year when the white people fled. The overseers, the slaveholders, the plantation owners left the region by no later than mid-May, usually by early May, and they don't come back until after the first frost, after the first heavy frost, which is around Thanksgiving most years. So it's important to note that most of the planters who were hit in the raid didn't live on the Combahee River. For some of them, the Combahee was their winter home. For at least one of them, this was just where they made their money. They actually lived in Charleston. Okay. So the Confederate Army had also reassigned its troops off of the Combahee River. And so there are no Confederate troops stationed on the river when the raid occurs. There are only 2 sets of pickets, one at Fields Point, one at Combahee Ferry, where the raid ends. And these pickets, their job was to assess the situation and call for reinforcements. There are wonderful newspaper articles about this first interaction, the first time these pickets encounter Black men in uniform, and they flee. They flee very quickly, and according to the newspapers, they fled so quickly they left their blankets warm, right? And off they go, sending a courier to call for reinforcements, and the reinforcements were 15 miles away on horseback. So it took them time, about 5 miles, to get to Green Pond to call for those reinforcements, and then to wait for them to arrive from 15 miles away on horseback. It took hours. Um, okay, so the 2 boats continue. They disembark these 2 companies of soldiers. They scare away the pickets, and they continue up the river. The transport steamer, the Harriet A. Weed, docks at Longbrow Plantation, which is midway up the river. And we know from a couple of accounts, one by the planter who lived at Longbrow, he was not the owner, but he lived on Longbrow, who says that he was awakened from his bed at 5 o'clock in the morning by his enslaved driver. And that would have been the enslaved man who managed the labor of the field hands, particularly during the sickly season, that the U.S. Army was coming up the river and that he instructed this enslaved driver to run to the fields, and the enslaved people are already in the fields, the rice fields, and take the field hands to the woods to hide. And he was going to gather up the house servants and take them to the woods and hide. We know from an account the life story of Minus Hamilton, and in so many ways, Minus Hamilton is the leading man of COMBEE. He was an 88-year-old man who told his life story to one of the Union commanders of another Black South Carolina regiment. He tells us where he was in bondage when he was born, tells us that the field hands were in the rice fields at 4 a.m. hoeing rice when they first saw the Union boats coming up the river. I should say, sensed the Union boats coming up the river, because they would not have been able to see their hands in front of their faces, let alone the long-handled hoes in their hands, or the snakes that infested the grass as they walked a mile from the slave cabins to the rice fields, or the alligators that infested the rice fields as they stood up to their ankles in muck hoeing rice. So we know from Mr. Minus Hamilton that the enslaved people were already at work at 4 a.m. And he tells us what happens to him and his wife on that morning. He talks about the overseer, again, who is in the rice fields with the field hands, and that in and of itself is very unusual because it's the sickly season. The overseer telling the field hands to run to the fields and hide. And I say in COMBEE, tongue in cheek, there was a whole lot of folks, a whole lot of white folks in the woods hiding on the morning of the raid that shouldn't have been there to begin with. He tells us how he felt when he saw young Black men in Union uniform for the first time. He was in complete awe. This man who was born and spent his entire life in bondage could not have imagined he would ever see this day. And then he tells us that he didn't care. And how many times do we learn how our enslaved ancestors felt? He didn't care watching the property of the man that held him and his wife in bondage going up in flames. He was going to the boat. And all of the people who were told to go to the woods, whether it was by the planter on Longbrow or the same plantation Minus Hamilton was on, which is just south of Longbrow, they all went to the boat. So the gunboat, the John Adams, continued up the river and docked at Combahee Ferry. We know that Harriet Tubman and her group of spies, scouts, and pilots, Colonel James Montgomery, and some of the 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, as well as some of the 3rd Rhode Island Heavy Artillery. And this was one battery of white soldiers that they were on the John Adams. Tubman, her men, Montgomery were in the pilot house because it was Tubman's men who piloted um, the Union up the river. So we know that when the 2nd South Carolina disembarked, again, they encountered Confederate pickets. This time, the pickets engaged. So there were skirmishes at Combahee Ferry. There would also be skirmishes later in the day at Fields Point and on a road that led from Fields Point up to where the reinforcements were located. So that's the road that reinforcements were coming down. So there were some skirmishes between the Union and the Confederates. We know that the John Adams positioned itself, this is the gunboat, so that it commanded the river and it shot down at the Confederate troops. And by this time, reinforcements had arrived and really drove them off. So the 2nd South Carolina disembarks, the 3rd Rhode Island Heavy Artillery disembark. They sent out rowboats to more distant plantations. And on the first boat at Longbrow, they also sent out rowboats. That's how Minus Hamilton got to the boat. We know that Harriet Tubman was on one of these rowboats. She was probably going to Bonnie Hall Plantation, which was a more distant plantation off the river. It's the one plantation where an, an enslaved person lost their life in the raid. A girl was shot in cold blood by the overseer of Bonnie Hall, who was able to get some of the Confederate reinforcements, just a handful, to accompany him back to Bonnie Hall Plantation. They positioned themselves between the freedom seekers and the boat, and they prevented freedom seekers from getting to freedom. This girl took a risk, right? She could see freedom and she ran to it, and they shot her in the back in her pursuit of freedom. We know that Tubman burned buildings and went to the slave cabins to coax the enslaved people, to tell the people who were still in the cabins, likely elderly people, possibly disabled people, to come to freedom. The 2nd South Carolina Volunteers, who were going to the plantation, which is called Cypress, which is just over an embankment from Combahee Ferry, where the gunboat parked. Some of these soldiers had liberated themselves a few weeks before the raid. This is their first time in full uniform, their first time, handling their muskets, and yet they walked across this embankment in the rice fields that was completely exposed. So they were exposed to Confederate fire if there had been fire on the river. And yet they walked across this embankment to Cyprus. I tell the stories of two of them, one of whom was Friday Barrington. I trace Friday because he and other freedom seekers liberated themselves from these same 7 plantations uh, months before the raid. He joins Colonel James Montgomery before the 2nd South Carolina is organized. Then he comes back in the raid and liberates his mother, his father, his brother-in-law, and his sister. And he and his brother-in-law both enlist in the 2nd South Carolina. Another story I mention is Hector Fields, who was my great, great, great grandfather. And I didn't know that Hector was a U.S. Colored Troops veteran until I was fairly well along in the book. So I'm happy to talk more about Hector in question and answer. In total, 7 rice plantations were burned in the raid. And that includes the plantation house, the stables, the barns with the previous year's rice harvest. And the soldiers opened the floodgates and flooded the crop that was growing in the fields. They flooded it with salt water and killed it. On a couple of plantations, they saved the slave cabins, and that's all that was saved. 756 people went to freedom. And backtracking, they also burned a pontoon bridge. So this pontoon bridge was a wooden bridge that was over Combahee Ferry. Today it is the Harriet Tubman Bridge. Um, the bridge was designed, it was strong enough that you could cross a cavalry over, but flexible enough that you could take it up behind you so the enemy could not follow you. So the 3rd Rhode Island Heavy Artillery took it up, and this severed the supply line between the Combee planters who were still producing rice on their plantations despite Confederate orders from the Confederate Army to evacuate this region. They stayed to continue producing rice, and they were selling it illegally, exporting it illegally, defying a U.S. Navy blockade, as well as using it to feed Confederate citizens and the Confederate military. And when the 756 people liberated themselves, I argue that this was the largest slave rebellion in U.S. history, the largest and most successful, and second in the history of the New World, only to the Haitian Revolution. So the main characters in Combee, of course, Harriet Tubman is the leading lady. And there's lots of new evidence about Harriet Tubman that documents her Civil War service and using documentation that has not been used before. There were a lot of challenges with documenting Tubman because she is not mentioned in the official military record. One new piece of evidence that we learn is her role in diffusing the torpedoes that were the mines, which at the time were called torpedoes, that had been planted on the Combahee River. We know that from Combahee that Harriet Tubman and her group of spies, scouts, and pilots infiltrated the Combahee River plantations, the Combahee rice plantations, at least around a week before the raid. They found, gathering from their intelligence gathering, the enslaved men who were forced to mine the Combahee River with torpedoes, as they were called. They accompanied the men back to the site with the U.S. Army officers, and the officers took up the torpedoes. And this opened the Combahee River up for the U.S. Army raid. It was on the basis of this evidence about the torpedoes that Governor Wes Moore commissioned Harriet Tubman, Brigadier General of the Maryland National Guard, on Veterans Day in 2024, and that the U.S. Army General Counsel issued a opinion, it's not an opinion, issued a ruling, there we go, issued a ruling a few days before the inauguration that Harriet Tubman was indeed a soldier and she should be honored as a soldier. She could not enlist because she was a woman, yet she risked her life for freedom. She risked her life for democracy, and she risked her life for our nation. So I'm on a team of folks who are trying to get Harriet Tubman the Medal of Honor. And this research about the torpedoes is the centerpiece of that. And lastly, Harriet Tubman has been inducted post-inauguration. I think this was in March of this year in the U.S. Army Women's Hall of Fame. So the other main characters are the freedom seekers. My goal in the book was to identify the people whom Harriet Tubman freed and to tell the story of the Combahee River Raid from their perspectives. And I do that using the U.S. Civil War pension files, which are a source that have been underutilized by historians. They've been utilized by genealogists, really to identify individual people and trace individual ancestors. And in Combahee, I use them to identify the people who liberated themselves in the raid, and to reconstruct the Combahee community. So I'm tracing these freedom seekers back into bondage and forward into freedom with the pension files as the foundation, but using a number of other sources like their Freedmen's Bank accounts, like the census, different sources in which people attest the names of their family members, using those sources to identify family groupings, and then tracing these family groupings back to the plantation records. And these two counties, and so many historians from South Carolina and historians of the Civil War, uh, they seem to delight in telling me, reminding me that both Beaufort and Colleton counties, where the raid took place, the county records were burned by Sherman. And I thank them for that. And then I showed them what I found, which is that I was able to document 85% of these slave transactions through mortgages, bills of sale, wills, estate records, and marriage settlements that were all filed in Charleston. So opening up the antebellum history of two counties of South Carolina that nobody had written because they were focused on Sherman, and they didn't seem to realize that white people in this area didn't actually live here, right? They lived somewhere else. This is where they spent their winters on these rice plantations, but they took care of their business where they lived, which was in Charleston. So the pension files are a treasure trove. They are an absolute treasure trove, and they enable people who are descendants of the U.S. colored troop soldiers. And about 90,000 soldiers got pensions. Many more than 90,000 applied for pensions, like my Hector. Hector, my great 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 grandfather Hector, never got a pension, right? He has a very slim pension file with not much information in it. His brother got a pension and has a 200-page pension file. So these pension files are a treasure trove that could allow millions of African Americans who are the descendants of this 90 plus thousand to identify our enslaved ancestors and potentially to know their names, to know where they were held in bondage and by whom, and to potentially trace them back to those plantation records in which they are only listed by first names. Okay, I'm running short on time. The last main character in Combahee is the rice fields and the environment. I wanted I wanted to put the reader in the rice fields. I wanted the readers to understand as much as we possibly can in the 21st century the lives and labors and loves of our enslaved ancestors. I wanted them to understand what their experiences were like in bondage on these rice plantations in this environment, which was deadly not only to white people but also to Black people, right? Malaria didn't kill most Black people, adults. It killed a lot of children, but it shattered their immune systems and made them unable to fight other illnesses. It made women unable to give birth to healthy babies, right? I wanted people to really understand what life was like on these rice plantations. And I wanted them to try to put themselves in the shoes of our ancestors and think about how they would have felt at 4 a.m. when they first sensed, smelled, felt, heard, then saw these Union boats coming up the river when they knew they were coming from the direction of freedom, because the U.S. had occupied Beaufort, where the boats took off in November of 1861. From November 1861, Beaufort, Port Royal, and the Sea Islands were occupied by the U.S. Army. So people knew where freedom was, right? It was 40 miles away, and anybody who could get there was already there. Now freedom was coming for them. I wanted us to be able to try to imagine what that would have felt like for someone like Minus Hamilton, who was born and spent his entire life in bondage. And so I did a number of things like reenacting the raid in a number of different ways. Um, and being in residence on the Combahee for 18 months. And so I, living on a Combahee plantation, and then for the rest of my time, the majority of the time, living very close to one so that I could cross the street and visit it every day if I wanted to. And really hiking through these rice fields and seeing over 2 growing seasons the changes in the vegetation, the birth, the growth of all the critters, including the alligators. Um, and just observing the region, the river, and every stage of tide through all of these different seasons. So I really wanted to put the reader in the rice fields with the freedom seekers. I'll stop there, and I hope we have time for questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fields Black. And for the members that came in late, you have the honor of speaking with to our 2025 Pulitzer Prize winner in history, Dr. Edna Fields Black. She's speaking about her book, Combee. And I will invite all of our members, if they have any questions for Dr. Fields Black, to enter in the chat or to utilize your raise your hand, and I will call upon you and to ask Dr. Fields a question. And I see our good friend, Dr. Robert Bellinger. I'll let you answer your questions to Dr. Fields Black.
Dr. Fields Black, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say I had the great opportunity to hear your presentation about a year ago at Middleton Place at the Descendants reunion.
Yes.
And I just have to say it just keeps getting better and better.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you. I remember meeting you at the Descendants reunion. And, Middleton Place is a special place. One plantation, Newport Plantation, which was destroyed in the raid, was a Middleton plantation. And so the Middletons are an important part of the story. They are the family that actually didn't live on the Combahee. So they had a number of Combahee plantations, which is where they made their money, right? And they lived at
Yep.
Middleton Place. And there was, why can't I call the name of it right now? I'm having a moment. It was not Combahee, but it was not Newport, but another one of their Combahee plantations. There was a small house. And so as the Middleton sons came back and forth to transact business and to, check on the overseer and check on the rice fields, they would stay there. But nobody lived, there was no house on Newport.
Mm.
There was no house on Newport for the planters. And so Middleton Place is an important part of the story as well as Newport.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bellinger. Any other questions for Dr. Fields Black? We thank you for your time, and you, like I said, you're a very busy woman, and congratulations on winning your Pulitzer Prize. I do encourage anyone to have any questions for Dr. Fields Black to put it in the chat. Dad, did you have a
I did.
statement you want to
I
say?
just wanted to say it is a pleasure to meet you, certainly via our format here, because I did have the opportunity to visit the Charleston African American Museum, which is a wonderful museum. If you're ever in Charleston, you should take an opportunity to go visit. And I was surprised at that time to see a video that had your comments on the actually I think the segment that you were speaking about was the rice portion of,
Hmm.
you know, and the impact that it had on the region. And uh, so you know, again, that was very informative and very surprising at that time. Quick question though, is rice still a major economic driver in that particular region? I didn't see any rice fields. Is that
Yeah, that's a good question. And no, it's not. There are Black families, Gullah Geechee families, which have grown rice and continue to grow rice on their land. And this is, for subsistence primarily. There's a small and maybe growing commercial rice industry, which is more recent. And this is more for the gourmet market, where people are now growing Carolina gold again. And to the level of not even selling it in Whole Foods, but more in gourmet markets.
mm,
Um, Today, the rice fields are the water in the rice fields is still maintained. And so enslaved people were forced to build an irrigation system, which would enable them to maintain a delicate balance of fresh and salt water in the rice fields? And this irrigation system comes from West Africa. The technology of it, the foundation of it comes from West Africa. So today, that irrigation system is still maintained. It's maintained, however, not to grow rice. It's maintained because these are hunting grounds, right? People who own these plantations, many of them are duck hunters. So the water um, l- levels are maintained to attract waterfowl, primarily for duck hunting.
okay? Thank you. It's very interesting. There, there are a couple of more questions on the chat. Naya?
Yes, I would like to there was a couple comments in there for you, Dr. Fields Black, about your cover of your book. There was a comment from Carol K. Condit. She wanted to know, the cover of your book is stunning and so apt. Did you choose this artwork?
I did. I did. I chose it actually as I decided to write Combee. Um, I'm very influenced and inspired by art. So I did some searching to identify, artists' interpretations of Harriet Tubman, and I came across the painting by William H. Johnson. And so this was my inspiration piece for years before I actually wrote the book. And I had to convince my press that this was going to be on the book cover, but they finally saw the light. William H. Johnson was a Depression era artist from Florence, South Carolina. So he is from the Gullah Geechee corridor in South Carolina, and they couldn't resist.
It is a stunning cover. I mean, so
Thank you.
captivating. It is very beautiful. Russell Williams has another question for you, Miss Dr. Fields Black. He wants to know, excuse me, Charleston at one point at least had a free Black population. Did they play any role in this?
Yes, Charleston did have a free Black population. I haven't found evidence that they did. This seems to have been people who were taken further south to Beaufort after this Battle of Port Royal in November of 1861. The Union conducted a number of raids um, just up and down from South Carolina down to Florida. And when they raided and when they liberated people, they would bring them and resettle them in Beaufort. Um, Now, after the Combahee Raid and after the end of the war, at least there were a small number of soldiers, including Friday Barrington, who did settle in Charleston after the war. But this is more of a Buford, Sea Islands, Combahee story.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phil's Black. We have your hands up. Jeff Manning, do you have a question for Dr. Phil's Black?
I do. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir,
Yes.
we can.
Congratulations on the book. I live in Massachusetts, and my ninth great grandfather built the building in 1696 in Massachusetts, and we have come across in our association leg irons and handcuffs, and I'm trying to find out the history of that, and I haven't found much. However, I came across an article that talked about. I'll give you the quote in the article. Their Negro servant who had been brought up upon the place. So I'm trying to find out more information about that. And all in the wills of the people, I didn't find anything regarding slaves. So I'm trying to figure out how to go about finding more information about slavery in this particular town of Billerica and history with my family and them.
Okay. So, when you're speaking of wills, you're speaking of wills from your family members.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would wonder, first of all, are there any names of manufacturers on the artifacts?
Yes, on the handcuffs, it's Hyatt, a company. I think it came from England, but there's nothing on the leg irons.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
Underground Railroad was nearby. A family member Manning was a jailer, and a few towns away. And those are the only theories. And there's a black family that rented out the building in the late 1800s. So
Okay.
those are
Do you know what was the use of the building?
originally it was a house for 5 generations of my family.
Okay, so it was a house.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hmm. And any diaries, any letters, anything? I'm assuming that they had servants.
I don't know. That's what I'm trying to. And this article that was written in the early 1900s, like 1917, said
Mm,
Negro servant, and it
right.
said grew up. So I'm assuming I don't know if they were um, purchased or if they were given to the family or if they had, uh, slaves that had a child and that child was this particular person they grew up. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
generations had slaves and that we don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
So
Have you been able to find any family papers?
nothing that brings up slaves or servants to my knowledge.
Okay. Um, you may be able to use what we call the friends and family approach. So if from your family papers you can identify other families with which they were associated, maybe through marriage, they could be neighbors, they could be business partners, they could be friends, with whom did they associate? And look in their papers. This is a strategy I had to use with the Combahee Raid because all of the plantation papers for these 7 plantation papers are burned. Now, for someone like the Middleton family, right, they have their collection and collections. It includes information about the different plantations they owned in Middleton Place and that kind of thing. But sometimes going sort of using a satellite approach, because, for example, if they had dinner together at the house, they may discuss who was serving, right? Other people who may have visited the house or known the family may have written about things that are related to the family and related to the house and what was going on in the house that you'll find in their papers and not in your family papers.
If I may interject, somebody could possibly shed more light on it than me. But have you done any research at the Boston Athenaeum, and looked at their archival, history? The Boston Athenaeum has been involved in as always, but recently in a lot of legacy of slavery history, and they have a wealth of information on a lot of families, if in Massachusetts. So that could be a possible source to continue your research, Jeff. Mhm.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Mhm.
I haven't yet.
Mhm.
And Jeff, I also sent you a message too in the chat. I will take just one last question for Dr. Fields Black. She's very busy, so we have to stop the meeting here in just a few minutes. But I will take one last question from Beth Folsom. And she is stated that you spoke about living and working on this book on site where the events took place. A lot of historians recently have been embracing this kind of experience-based research. Can you speak a bit on how being physically embedded in a place can give historians a deeper experience than just documented-based research?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for me, what I was attempting to do was to take the primary sources in which I was reading about the raid, whether they were newspaper articles or letters or journals from uh, Union commanders, minus Hamilton's life story, um, all of the bits and pieces that I was of primary source material, and attempting to map them onto the landscape, and attempting to think about how on 7 plantations, because each plantation is different, how the enslaved people would have gotten from the slave quarters to the river, or in some cases from the slave quarters to the rice fields, and then the rice fields were a distance from the river. So I was trying to map how, what were their movements, right? And then to think about what would their experiences have been in these rice fields. And honestly, being able to see them um, helped me tremendously. And also being able to do the reenactments. I'll give you one example. One of the reenactments we did was walking through the rice fields barefoot, because I've spent 35 years in rice fields in West Africa and South Carolina and Georgia, always in boots and pants, and all kinds of protective gear, which enslaved people would not have had. And I had written a draft a couple days before, polished it the night before, with the enslaved running through the rice fields to the boat. Well, I got out there with no shoes on and quickly learned there was no running happening, right? And it was, you put your foot down and you sink up to your knee. It was very slippery because of algae, and also quite prickly. Now, I don't have the calluses on my feet that enslaved people would have had. Um, and on that morning, I was with a group of scientists that I'm the PI for. On that morning, as we stood in the rice fields, a baby alligator swam in the fields with us. And this is when I tried to run through the rice fields, right? This is when I am enacting what I wrote about the night before, and learned that it was totally impractical. And so what I ended up doing is walking to the embankments, and the irrigation system in the rice fields is in these embankments. It's encased in the embankments. So walking as quickly as I could to the embankment, and then I had to be pulled up, right? Because the embankment is tall, had to be pulled up out of the rice fields. And as soon as I got onto that embankment, we heard the belly flop, which was the mother alligator coming to look for her baby. So these are the kinds of things that, it's one thing to read even a first person account. It's quite another thing to try to go to the location of that account and, try to put all of those dynamics together. I think that's very important for historians to do, if at all possible.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Fields. This has been a fascinating presentation, and you have just brought your book to life. You really captured it and just really brought us there.
Thank
We're
you.
very proud of you for all your accomplishments here at the Slave Legacy History Coalition. Thank you for giving us and honoring you with your time. We will continue to support you. Please go to our website and support this wonderful, beautiful Black woman, Dr. Fields Black. Her book is on our website and on our newsletter. If you would like to be a presenter here at the Slave Legacy History Coalition, please get in touch with us. If you have anything that you would like for us to support, we would love to do that. Any type of books, information, please let us know. We would like to get it out to the public. Next month, we are looking forward to having our presenter on June 11th. It will be our good friend, Dr. Gloria Wyden. She will be speaking on her new book, Belonging, An Intimate History of Slavery and Family in New England. And we just want to thank you all again for your time. We're looking forward to seeing you again next month. And let us all give Dr. Fields Black a huge congratulations for the 2025 Pulitzer Prize winner in history. Thank you. Great job, Dr. Fields Black. And we look forward to seeing everyone next month. And God bless everyone. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank
Bye.
you so much.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care now. Bye.
Bye-bye.